Hi there. Thank you for joining this live session on pop-up stores or ephemeral stores. Today I will be sharing with you 10 things you need to keep in mind when designing your pop-up store. If you have been watching the previous episodes on ephemeral retailing, you would have definitely understood that pop-up stores' atmospheres are viable to the pop-up store's success. There are many pop-up stores that we see today, and all of them have presented their concepts in unique ways, using unique themes or unique designs, or maybe personalizing their furnitures, their layouts, their displays, and so on. So today we're going to look at 10 things that you should keep in mind when designing the pop-up store's atmosphere in order for you to gain an important exposure of this brand through the pop-up store. And in order for you to create lots of visibility of your pop-up store on social media sites or other sites. I need to remind you that pop-up store atmospheres are a direct result of your brand strategy, your brand's positioning, and your brand's competitive advantage. Being said, the pop-up store's atmosphere has to reflect the brand's identity in terms of colors, in terms of material, or in terms of any design element that has to be inserted in that pop-up store. We also understand that pop-up stores themselves become communications tools or tools that help the brand gain greater visibility on the market vis-a-vis the competition. Therefore, the pop-up store is a good positioning tool that the brand can use in order to enhance visibility or to meet any strategic objective it's looking at. The pop-up store design should also speak to the target audience. You need to always design your store keeping your target audience in mind. The pop-up store needs to speak the same language of the target audience, and we'll understand that in a minute. The atmosphere of the pop-up store has an important dimension, and this is the social dimension, which means that the pop-up store's atmosphere should be created to help you get in greater or in a closer way with your target audience. The pop-up store's atmosphere has to create a link, an exchange, in order for your brand to gain hot information from the target audience, information that is viable to your pop-up store and to your brand. So let's go back to the initial subject that we are going to discuss today, the 10 most important things that you need to keep in mind when designing your pop-up store's atmosphere. First of all, think of your general exterior. Depending on the location that you have chosen and the pop-up store's format, that is a storefront, a boutique, a kiosk, a store-in-store, or a mobile version, your exterior has to be very appealing in order to call customers in or people who are passing by. That being said, the general exterior or your storefront has to be appealing, has to clearly state your name, who you are, and has to have some information that can help your customer understand the nature of this pop-up store and help them have a better idea on the content that's going to be shared in that store. So the first design element is related to your exterior, to your pop-up store's exterior. The second element looks in detail at your store's window. Of course, if you're doing a pop-up store using a traditional format such as a boutique, your storefront or the window is crucial. It has to call your customers, it has to draw them in. So let's go into detail about this window. The window could have design elements as well as communications elements. And we are seeing more and more types of pop-up stores who are developing interactive windows. Interactive windows that allow the customer to have a first-hand experience before going into the pop-up store. Think of that. Maybe it could be a good way to create more curiosity regarding your pop-up store. So, the general exterior is important and the storefront is important. For those who are developing pop-up stores in reduced formats such as a kiosk or maybe a mobile version or popping in other stores, the store's window would not be relevant in that case. However, the design of the kiosk, of the format itself, has to be very interesting and appealing. Now we move to the general interior. We have also spoken about the general interior's importance. The general interior of a pop-up store might be very similar in terms of design to the interior of a traditional store. That being said, when thinking of the general interior, we think of the entrance zone, the decompression zone, the central zone, and the rear or the back of the pop-up store. However, what's very important in terms of the general interior is creating spaces in which the customer should bump or stop flowing during his visit. We mean by that the interior has to lead the customer into a narrative, into a story, or lead him into an adventure inside the store. I know that there are several pop-up stores that have reduced formats or very small formats. This would not prevent you from thinking about interiors that are interactive and that allow the customer to stop several times during his visit to do something interesting, either testing a product, trying it, or doing other types of activities that you might be presenting to him or her. So, in order for you to have your general interior conceived in an attractive way, you have to have also a layout of your pop-up store. The layout would help you put your interior in value and would help you generate a greater contact with your target audience and would allow your target audience to spend more time in the pop-up store. And this is key to your pop-up store's success. I'll explain that in a minute. So, your layout and your design's interior, as I said, are a result of your pop-up store's identity. So, the theme that you are choosing for that particular pop-up store has to relate to your pop-up store's identity. You cannot develop pop-up stores that pop up haphazardly or pop-up stores that do not have any relation with your initial brand's identity. Because if you aim to do several pop-up stores, you have to have a connecting thread between the first and the 10th or the 20th pop-up store. The theme can be creative, however, the theme has to relate at each and every time to your pop-up store's brand identity. And when you're designing your pop-up store, you're surely going to use some furniture or material inside the store. For example, some hanging furniture or tables or display boards or pegboards. Whatever you're going to choose in terms of furniture in order to develop your pop-up store, make sure that the furniture reflects to the initial pop-up store's objective and the theme and your pop-up store's identity. Why am I highlighting the idea of pop-up store's identity? It's also important to think of the pop-up stores and in terms of the brand and the brand's offering. If your pop-up store is proposing to customers certain merchandise, limited editions or other type of merchandise, it has to display them on these furniture. And the merchandise have to look like it is planted and it is part of the decor of your pop-up store. Does it make sense? I think yes, because you cannot have elements that do not match and do not create a fit in your pop-up store's context. I see here that there are some questions popping up, and I will answer these questions in a minute. The seventh most important thing related to your pop-up store's atmosphere and that you need to think of when designing an atmosphere is information and in-store media. This is crucial to your pop-up store's success, especially if you're thinking of creating a viral message related to that pop-up store. We are looking at more and more technological tools that could be inserted in the pop-up store as part of the pop-up store's design and furniture, and that help you create the connection between the store, the store's community, and the community on your social media sites. Being said, these types of tools could be intelligent mirrors or photo booth or testing boards. And the customer could, for example, go into the store, try a top or test a cream, and then take a picture, post that picture on his social media sites, tag the brand, etc. On the other hand, the brand could decide not to sell anything inside the store, but lead the customer to its online store or website via QR codes or links or promotional codes that it is distributing in store. So think of these elements and think, of course, of the budget that you have in hand in order to insert technological tools inside your pop-up store to gain greater visibility of that event. So technological tools and in-store media have to go hand in hand, and they have to always lead your customer into the direction that you aim to have from the pop-up store and from this event. The ninth important thing related to design is music, lighting, and scent. As these elements are part of your atmosphere, they create an ambiance that is very important in the pop-up store's atmospheric. Actually, ambience and design factors are atmospheric variables related to any store's atmosphere. Might as well think of these elements to create a greater connection with the customer, to make him live the story related to the brand and really live the message that you wish to transmit throughout that pop-up store. Finally, the 10th most important things that you need to think about when designing a pop-up store is the human factor or the personnel. Yes, a pop-up store's atmosphere is comprised of ambience and design factors, but the third most important variable in that formula is the human factor. Your pop-up store has to be represented by team members who have to also transmit the pop-up store's story or your brand story. They have to engage with the customer and they have to get in touch with the customer. This is the closest you can get to your target audience, and this is the closest you can get into collecting viable, hot data from your target audience. So please keep those elements in mind when it comes to designing your pop-up store. So I will wrap up before answering all of your questions, and I will repeat the 10 most important things that you need to keep in mind when designing a pop-up store's atmosphere. Keep in mind that your pop-up store has to be aligned with your brand strategy and objectives. The pop-up store has to look at the general exterior. the store's window or storefront, the general interior, the layout, the theme, design, the furniture and decorations, and then it has to include information and in-store media or point of sale information. It has to integrate technological and digital tools, and it has to think about lighting, scent, music, and environmental factors, and it has to definitely highlight the human factor. I hope that these elements have been enlightening and will help you design your pop-up store better. So, thank you all for joining and thank you for your questions. If I can go up to answer all of your questions one by one. Thank you all for joining. Hi, everyone. Okay. So the first question is about how much does it cost to design a pop-up store? Well, this question does not have a straight answer, as the cost of a pop-up store might vary depending on the budgets that you have and the budgets that you wish to allocate in a pop-up store. The cost also depends on the pop-up store, if it is developed by a brand who is starting up or a mature brand. If I can give an example, a startup could put aside a budget for a pop-up store entirely around $2,000 or $3,000. And sometimes this is excessive to a startup brand. Whereas other developed brands could develop pop-up stores that could go up to $50,000 or $60,000. It depends on the location that you are taking, it depends on the message that you want to send from the pop-up store, and it depends on the objectives that you need to meet from the pop-up store. And of course, it depends on the maturity that you have on the market. I hope that this has answered your question. If you have other questions, please let me know. Where is it best to open up a pop-up store? Any suggestion? Yes. Pop-up stores should find their way in the right location, the right timing, and in front of the right target audience. This being said, the pop-up store should pop up in the location that seems most relevant at this period of time. It depends on the country you are in or the city that you are in. For example, pop-up stores could find themselves popping around the festive seasons, Christmas or New Year's, Valentine's, or even in the springtime during Mother's Day, Easter, or summertime. This depends on what type of offering your brand proposes to the customer and to his target audience. So choosing locations has to align, of course, with your pop-up store's strategy and objectives. If you are aiming for greater visibility, you should go and choose locations that are premium locations, high streets that are busy, etc. If your objective is to go more into pop-up stores that are hidden and you want to create a certain pop-up store hunt, like a treasure hunt, you might favor locations that are not visible so that the customer goes and searches for your pop-up store. For example, there are many brands that look at industrial locations or locations that have been deserted for a long time, such as a theater, a pharmacy, you name it, and they do their pop-up stores there. A brand called Comme des Garçons has been one of the first brands who have developed these types of pop-up stores in unconventional locations in order to make their customers go and hunt for the pop-up store. Today we are looking at locations that are prime or more common, where you can benefit from the customer dwell, where your customer suddenly passes in this location and sees that you appear there. So you have to also understand that prime locations might be locations that everyone are looking at and might be more expensive. So again, it depends on the budget that you have for this project and your capacity in paying for the location that you are choosing. How do you decide on the duration of the pop-up store? Pop-up stores of brands, startup brands or developed brands, can stay on an average of 2 weeks to 2 months. Sometimes we can see extremes, such as pop-up stores that are more event-based that can last for a day or a few hours. And on the other extreme, luxury brands can use pop-up store locations and stay up to 1 year. So, if we can answer this question simply, we can say that the average of a pop-up store's duration is around a couple of weeks. You have to bear in mind that the longer you're staying in a pop-up store, the more costs that you have to include in terms of animations or inserting activities in order not to bore your customers, because the pop-up store's idea is to have customers amazed every time they are visiting the store, and if you are staying longer you might risk looking like a traditional store. So we don't want to do that. So you have to be very careful on the duration and how much activities you have in mind, or you have the capacity to do, or the budget to do. Do you think it would be a good idea for brands to invest in a pop-up store after the crisis that has been occurring in France to start a brand? Okay, we have had lots of questions related to retail or the retail's health or well-being after this harsh period that we have been going through. It is true that pop-up stores can help brands go out of the monotony and create or inject some excitement into the retail scene. If we go back to 2008, after the recession, pop-up stores were a great example of reanimating the retail scene and injecting lots of novelty, especially for brands who were not capable to pay immense amounts of money to invest in the traditional campaigns, advertising campaigns. So they preferred doing pop-up stores, because the pop-up store itself could be a media tool. It could generate positive word of mouth on social media, which is a good way to communicate your brand. And if your objective was to do some sales, the pop-up store could help you liquidate some merchandise on the spot and cash in on the spot. So I believe that pop-up stores would be a good and interesting solution for brands who wish to do something new or inject some kind of novelty with minimal budgets, as we said, through pop-up stores. And we have another question. Is a pop-up store a good idea for younger brands, or does it help consolidate the brand's image? Yes, pop-up stores are great tools for startup brands. I have to highlight here that most of the startup brands can decide to pop up in collective pop-up stores. That means that you can share the space with other designers who can offer merchandise that is complementary to yours and does not directly compete with yours. This way you can share the cost of renting the location, and you can benefit from each other's contacts. The person who is visiting the pop-up store of your colleague or your fellow brand would also come visit yours, etc. So for a startup brand, if you have the budget, you could start popping up in several locations as well. It would help you test different types of locations, different types of audiences, and collect viable data related to how customers perceive your merchandise, whether they like it, whether not, etc. So it's really important for you to pop up in several locations before deciding to grow into concessions or going into physical stores, because this might incur important budgetings that you might not have at the beginning of your brand's takeoff. How can we engage customers inside a pop-up store? This is a very important question and a crucial question. We have said that the human factor in a pop-up store is one of the variables that we should highlight at each time, and each time we're developing pop-up stores. That being said, the human factor means that not only we are creating a space, we are creating spaces in which customers could feel at home, spaces that are not stuck up, spaces that do not restrain the customer from doing what he feels like doing inside the store. So engagement comes first of all from the layouts design. Designing spaces also that are called social spaces, maybe offering coffee, tea, cocktails, or some cakes in a small space of the pop-up store. And this we are seeing much and much more with all of the pop-up store projects. You have to make sure that you have a human connection between the customer and the personnel. They have to come to the customer as friends and engage with them as such, and break the vertical connection that we used to see in most of the traditional retail stores. And finally, in order to create an engagement inside the pop-up store, we said that you have to include many technological elements that allow the customer to share his experience with customers who are visiting the pop-up store at that moment, and other people who are part of his network or social network, etc. So I hope I have answered your question. Any tips or watch outs for an agriculture startup? This is an interesting question. Pop-up stores could be also purely informative types of stores. It depends on the brand objective, of course. So you can choose a format that could be a small kiosk or a mobile format that you can move from location to location, maybe to different agricultural sites. And in this location, you would invite people or team members or workers who are working in these agricultural sites to maybe disseminate some important information about the usage of the product that you are selling or you are proposing, etc. So in that pop-up store, you could provide a sort of informative, interactive tool in order for you to engage your brand with your target audience. I don't know if your target audience is a particular customer to business to customer or business to business. It always depends again on your brand and on your target audience. And I think malls won't be available in the next phase 2020. What's a better option for a pop-up store location outside the mall? Yes, pop-up stores are very popular in locations that are external. We can see even today that pop-up stores are doing like sorts of conglomerates in areas that could be empty areas, in which we do collective types of pop-ups where customers can go and pop in as kiosks or mobile versions in order to propose during a certain period of time a certain themed offering for the target audience. We have seen also that pop-up stores could choose locations that are more traditional, such as empty storefronts or boutiques. And we can look at types of pop-up stores that choose unconventional locations, such as recycling the use of spaces that have been abandoned or deserted. So it depends on your pop-up store and on your objectives, and the choice will be then related to that. It doesn't have to be inside a mall. Actually, pop-up stores who pop inside malls would benefit more from the mall's dwell, but could be less creative on the pop-up store's format or design or layouting. I hope I have answered your question. Can it be a transportable pop-up store? Yes, yes, yes. We have seen many examples of mobile pop-up stores, as we call them, or bus pop-up stores. You can see the example of, for example, the Beatles, who have toured the city to promote an album. Or you can see lots of fashion pop-up stores who pop up from city to another in order to promote their collection, especially with brands working with sustainable fashion, etc. So this version is really popular. Some other pop-up stores could be taking the forms of hangars or kiosks that could be mounted and dismounted and moved from location to location. You can see brands, for example, who pop in different beaches during the summer period, such as Havaianas or maybe Decathlon, and who can pop in in different locations using the same format that they dismount at each time and display it again in another location. So thank you, everyone. I hope that I have been I have another question. Should it be traditional or always high-tech? I think that most of the pop-up stores that are popping up with a minimum budget are traditional. And they rely on the person and his smartphone to take pictures, tag, post, share, etc. But they do not have the budgets to integrate high-tech elements or digital elements. But developed and mature brands who have developed or proposed pop-up stores that are of really great design have integrated high-tech elements, because these elements generate lots of visibility and engagement inside the store. So if you have the budget and if you are a mature brand, I think that you cannot go without high-tech elements. For smaller and startup brands, the pop-up store relies more on design, on the human interaction, on the collections or the offering, and less on high-tech elements. I hope that this session has been beneficial to you, and I hope that you have grasped important information related to pop-up store and pop-up stores' atmospheres. If you are interested in knowing more about pop-up stores, please visit my YouTube channel, Ghalia Boustani, or you can look at the Huckster_FR Instagram page for more videos related to pop-up store. We will be doing more interviews and live sessions on this Instagram account. So I hope that you can join me again for another session later on this week, and I will be sharing more information about this episode in a few. Thank you all, and stay safe.